well, we're not lonely, are we?
We? No. No. We're too attractive to be lonely.
Yeah, but we are alone.
I'm not alone. No, spinsters and shutters, toll booth attendants, these are alone people. But Manuel is lone, as in a lone ranger or a lone wolf. Now, alone is an unfortunate predicament. Lone is an aesthetic choice.
Right.
Is an in-depth story analysis. If you haven't seen this film, you might want to before listening to this review. Hello, folks. How's it going? It is Monday night. I've changed the night at least for the foreseeable future for the live Superhero Rewind Unscripted show. Tonight, we're going to be taking a look at The Lone Ranger from 2013, the Disney movie that was an absolute flop and is somewhat notorious, and that I had an absolute fascinating experience with putting this together. I will try really hard to make this not the absolute least articulate I have ever been in one of these, but I have been in a real weird back and forth kind of place with this. I had a really different experience with it watching it the second time around this time. I always watch these things twice, and sometimes when I'm writing, because I know I do this off the cuff, but I still do a lot of writing for this show now. I write a lot of notes, and basically what I give you is the notes that I would be starting with to write a Superhero Rewind. I usually just a little bit more organized, and sometimes I'll, read directly. And anyway, so did a lot of writing with this. I've got like some 5,000 words worth of notes, and in all of that writing, I found myself feeling a little bit different about it than I have before. And I'm concerned that this is going to be one of those movies that if I go back and see it again, I might feel differently about looking at it from different lenses and different moods every time I look at it. So I don't mean to be wishy-washy about everything. I know this is not the first time that I've said this is the best experience that I've had with a movie and on Rewind, and suddenly it might look like I'm being too easy on a thing or pulling my punches a little bit, but I'm really not. In fact, I will probably have to bear with me tonight, because I will probably have to look real hard at and skip over certain notes that I don't even 100% agree with anymore, or you might even find me arguing with myself a little bit this evening. So I said in a video yesterday that I thought this was going to be real cut and dried and not that long of a rewind, and it might end up approaching and hitting that 2-hour mark again. I welcome everybody. Thanks a lot for being here, for watching live. Thanks for watching after the fact if you were doing that. Real quick, I want to do a quick plug and say that t-shirts are now available both for Superhero Rewind and Geekvolution at large. We've just partnered with TeePublic, and the link is in the description there, and I'm mentioning it here for folks watching live because several shirts, all of our Geekvolution original designs and logos are on sale right now. Part of the reason we launched when we did was because we're at the tail end of a T-Fury sale, or T-Fury, pardon me, a TeePublic sale. I'm going to try really hard not to do that since we're partnered with them, but I used to use T-Fury all the time buying shirts. Anyway, so TeePublic, but you can get our shirts for, at the moment anyway, this is going to be outdated immediately, but if you happen to be watching right now, $14 right now are regular shirts, and the Geekvolution logo, Superhero Rewind Unscripted, the SR Superhero Rewind logo, etc., for just the next day or two. So anyway, take a look at that if you're so inclined. And also, as always, if you want to become a Patreon producer, you can go to patreon.com/geekvolution, and the $10 tier allows you to converse with me in Discord and to meet with me once a month to watch superhero movies sometimes and to just chat about superhero movies other times. This month, we're watching The Batman together, all of the producers. So if you want to join us for that, that's going to be Saturday, I believe, the 22nd 27th of this month of August, and strap in because it's 3 hours long, and we're all going to watch it together, and I have not seen it in a couple months, so it's going to be a lot of fun to do that. But anyway, let's go ahead and get into The Lone Ranger. As always, I will chat with you guys in the comments a little bit later in the show. If you want to leave a super chat, as always, that guarantees that whatever aspect about the movie you want me to talk about that maybe I don't cover, I'm going to be pretty thorough here, but I might miss some things, or just to express your opinion, or to argue with me about something, feel free, any of that. I will guarantee to talk about anything with super chats, but I also will try to converse with you in the regular comments as well, so don't feel like you absolutely have to do that. So once again, 2013, this was a big Johnny Depp star vehicle. I think a lot of people kind of started off on the wrong foot with this movie, just with that. Already, it was a little bit late to cast somebody like Johnny Depp in a Native American role. I think a lot of people were immediately kind of irked by that and wondered why we couldn't go to a Native American. And however you feel about representation and whether somebody of the particular ethnicity on film should always play that character, it was a little bit difficult to even imagine him in that role. And with this particular role, not that I'm let me say this up front, not that I'm a giant Lone Ranger fan. Watched some of that when I was a kid, and weirdly in college, my dad and I were, or just before college, when I got out of high school, my dad and I were watching some Lone Ranger, and I remember being a little bit surprised that the original, because I didn't know anything about that show back then, really, I was surprised that the original actor was native. He was Canadian, but he was a native Canadian, and it just really kind of elevated that show, and it was with the authenticity of it back then, even as somewhat cornball and unbelievable as that show was. Real black and white. The heroes always win. Lone Ranger always does the right thing. It was very George Reeves Superman or Fleischer Superman, of course, but it gave it a bit of credibility, and it was also just kind of surprising in the 50s. It was pretty progressive because so often you would just hire somebody that looked like vaguely ethnic, or get a white guy and kind of paint his face. And so Johnny Depp is wearing like this kind of caked on white face paint the whole movie to kind of cover up the fact that he's not very Native American. I think Disney came out and was like, well, he's got like, 0.0002 or something, Native American blood, so he can play this part. But like I said, the bigger deal was just I would have appreciated the authenticity of that, but the bigger deal was just, we've got to get the director of Pirates of the Caribbean and try to get lightning in a bottle again. How can we sell something like Lone Ranger? Instead of just doing a straight up Western, maybe modernizing it in making it, a little bit darker, a little rougher around the edges, a little bit more believable in the historical context, maybe even be a little bit more realistic about how the Native Americans were treated and that kind of thing. And we do that in this movie, of course. It's a little late when we get there, because if you don't know what you're getting yourself into, you don't really know that Tonto is a crazy person until like an hour, maybe even an hour and a half in. I think it's like an hour in when we finally start to get his backstory, and we realize that he's just, he's lost his mind because I'm getting ahead of myself, but he's lost his mind because he sold his tribe out when he was a kid for a pocket watch because he didn't understand what was going on, and most of his tribe was killed by white settlers trying to get their hands on silver, and it kind of screws him up and turns him into sort of a Punisher figure, but also makes him believe in a lot more in a lot of mysticism than the rest of his tribe does. And anyway, if you don't know that, it might come off a little bit offensive, where it's like, oh, well, he's, a Native American, and they're all, they have really backwards ideas about things, and so he's a crazy person. But anyway, so clearly Disney, their approach to this was, let's take something with name recognition, not even necessarily, let's find something with a fan base that anybody's really going to care about. But of course, we do this with properties all the time, and especially now. But then it was already starting to get pretty prevalent. With things like The Day the Earth Stood Still a couple years before this, maybe 3 or 4 years before this, and things like The Karate Kid, and those kinds of movies where we just take a name people recognize, so maybe they'll go just out of curiosity, even if they've never seen the original, and then we kind of bake it into something completely different. And I feel less that way about this on this last viewing, delving into it and kind of, with a fine-tooth comb, but it still is, so I don't know that there's as much change for the sake of change as I thought there was, but there's a lot of change. In a lot of ways, this isn't exactly the Lone Ranger, and like I said, I'm having a hard time not looking at this with two totally different brains. There's one brain that says it's not fair to people that really like the Lone Ranger and to the original creators of that property, that this isn't going with kind of the original Lone Ranger Bible. And then the other part of me goes, but I like reimaginings of things sometimes. This is kind of Smallville. This is kind of Batman Begins. Again, getting ahead of myself, but the Lone Ranger isn't originally a ranger in this, and I'll break down later on all the ways that this deviates from the original Lone Ranger, just for your information in case you're not familiar with it. But originally he's one of the 6 Rangers, and he and every time I say that, I'm going to be thinking about Power Rangers. It's so weird that it's that number, right? Where it's like you have 5 Power Rangers, and then you have this extra lone 6th one, and he's the important one, and he's the one that gets to survive in this case. Yes, the Lone Ranger is Tommy Oliver. But anyway, in this, there's 6, and then he ends up being a deputized extra ranger. Not 100% sure that it even makes sense that he gets that position and why he gets that position, but that's what happens. And he's a lawyer, and so he has the same a value system, more or less, as the Lone Ranger, but he comes from a very different place in the first place, and it's very Batman Begins about it. It's like, if we're going to make this an origin story, how do we pad that out to a whole movie? And padded this is, by the way. So you kind of start with the big question of, is Lone Ranger a Batman thing or a Fantastic Four thing, right? Is there an argument for, and maybe there is with Fantastic Four too, don't get me wrong, but like, I always go to that as the example of, the big problem with that first Fantastic Four movie from 2005 is, it's kind of, there's not really much of a story. It's, our characters get our powers and then we just use our powers, then we have powers. So, is this a thing that makes sense to build a whole story, right? Is there a story here, like there is with Batman Begins? And, I don't know, the jury is somewhat still out on that, because it kind of has to cheat in order to tell that story, and the story it's telling is, in a lot of ways, Batman Begins. Here in a little bit, I'll also break that whole thing down. This is a curious choice for Disney, although maybe not that surprising, given that a year before this, they put out John Carter, and that movie didn't perform, but this was already in the works, so they had to put that out. I think they made some changes with it because of John Carter. Lawson and I were talking about this today. He did a little bit of research while he watched the movie as well, and he mentioned that to me, and I did some reading and also saw that. So this, I think, would have even gone in some more crazy directions, maybe, if it hadn't been for that movie. And it's probably for the best that that didn't happen, but I say it's curious because Disney has had a bit of a track record before this with trying stuff from this period, reinventing or bringing back pulp things or things that are like pulp things, like The Rocketeer. The big difference between this and The Rocketeer, of course, is that bombed, but then it became a big cult classic, and everybody that I've ever talked to that's seen that movie loves it, and it just didn't get traction. I think it was just the wrong place and the wrong time with that. The question, the big difference also with that, of course, is, so I'm sorry, where I was going with that is, it was liked, and this was not liked. But then the big question is, did this not do well because it comes out and critics bomb, it bombs and critics don't like it. Critics kind of review bomb it, I should say. Or would it not have performed even if more people liked it? Like, I think it would have done somewhat better at the box office, certainly. This didn't make its money back. It performed very poorly, and it was a huge bloated budget. It's a bloated movie in a lot of ways. It has a bloated runtime, but it's also a really bloated it also has a really bloated budget. It was $650 million in all told, including advertising. Like, that's what it would have had to make to just break even, is $650. That's a tall order for most movies, and I can't decide if Disney was themselves putting this in the superhero category like I am, because it wasn't really sold like a superhero movie, but I think for lots of different reasons it counts. And when you look at the trailers and the way this movie was sold, I do have to say it wasn't false advertising. I think what was I'm going on 9-year-old memory. I didn't go back and rewatch trailers for this, but from what I remember, I went into the theater and I was perplexed by the structure of this movie and the length of it and the pacing and some of the choices with Tonto and John Reed, particularly that John Reed felt too in the background for his own movie and he seemed like kind of a klutz. And now that I've seen this movie like 4 times, I feel a little bit differently about that, and I can't decide if the movie has just worn me down now, or if I'm seeing it through a new lens where I wasn't appreciating some things that are there because there's so many distractions in this movie that keep me from getting what the point of it is and a lot of the actual story beats and such. But when I went and saw the movie in the theater, I do remember thinking, well, okay, I mean, this is the movie they sold. Like, it looked like kind of Pirates of the Caribbean, and it looked, kind of bat stuff insane, and that indeed is what it is. But then you look at things like Disney Infinity, where we are selling at least the characters to kids, and it feels like, because they're not really expecting just adults to play that game, or even mostly adults to play that game, and I don't remember what the toy merchandising looked like with this, but I'm pretty sure it had figures and stuff, and like lots of things even aimed more at adults have figures and stuff. But what I mean is, in the merchandising department, it did feel like it was sold a little bit more like a superhero thing. And the budget would make you think, where they have the confidence enough to put that much of an advertising budget behind this, they've got to be to some degree thinking, well, we know we own Marvel and Avengers and everything, and this is the year after Avengers, but maybe we can get even more of that pie in like the pulp superhero department, so like we can keep pushing other brands we own, and I don't know how Disney got their hands on this, by the way, and how the movie rights versus TV rights work, because I don't even think they have it now. I looked this up. I think it's Universal or somebody, and then like 10 years before this, CW did a pilot, which I've never seen, and I'm kind of half curious to watch now. It looks dreadful, but they did that around the same time as the Tarzan show, the short-lived modern-day urban jungle Tarzan show, and The Lone Ranger got a 2-hour pilot that was aired as a TV movie, but then didn't go to series, and that was kind of the last thing we had heard from Lone Ranger in video media before this came out. So anyway, so like I said, like why Lone Ranger? It's just something of a curious choice. I would have been more conservative about my budget and such, and I just think that the biggest mistake they made, regardless of how I might feel now about certain parts of this script, and especially the third act, I think it's a mistake to try to catch that lightning in a bottle twice, to go, let's make essentially the same movie. It's not beat for beat Pirates of the Caribbean, of course, and I don't know those movies super well, but tonally it's a lot like that. It's got the weirdness of that. It's got Johnny Depp acting like kind of a crazy, eccentric weirdo, fool kind of character. There are places in this movie where I feel like Johnny Depp has to remind himself that he's not supposed to be drunk. It's like, oh, Tonto doesn't drink. He drove himself insane because he did a stupid thing when he was young that got a lot of people he cared about killed. And his performance is bizarre, and they're really selling it on that. And also, I think people were not only weirded out by just Johnny Depp playing a Native American and Johnny Depp being the star of this, but also just that he's up front. He has the marquee. It's his name first before Arnie Hammer, and it's called The Lone Ranger, and it's about John Reed. Usually, by the way, the Lone Ranger has the last name of Reed, but not always necessarily a first name, because the original creators wanted the Lone Ranger to be super mysterious and to never take the mask off, and for nobody to know really his name. So he just has that last name. And but like I said, we'll get into all that stuff a little bit later. But I think because his name is first, and the advertising was so sold on him, and because he's the first thing you see in the movie and he's telling the story, I think a lot of us, me included, mistakenly watched this movie like he was more upfront than he is. And I've had to see this 4 times before I really appreciate this. This is actually, in fact, the Lone Ranger's movie. You could make the argument that it's a dual protagonist thing because they certainly both have character arcs, but surprisingly, the more I'm looking at this and again writing about it, I was finding that it really is kind of John Reed's story. And I'm like, when I started breaking down characterization and thematic ideas and stuff, I was like, okay, this is again Batman Begins. Like John Reed has to figure out where he stands with justice, and it's not exactly the same thing as with Batman, where it's kind of the opposite. Actually, he's in a different place. He's too naive, and he's got to become kind of world weary before he's allowed to keep the mask on and become the Lone Ranger. Whereas Bruce Wayne in Batman Begins starts from a really cynical place, almost picks up a gun and kills his parents' murderer, and then learns that justice and vengeance are not the same thing. So like they're coming from completely opposite places. I think in some ways it's too derivative of Batman Begins, and in other places I think it's really interesting and a little bit thoughtful about how it's riffing on Batman Begins in recreating the Lone Ranger. It's also, going back to the Johnny Depp playing Tonto thing, it's also kind of curious that, because I saw an interview with him where he said he wanted to play Tonto to show, so that Hollywood would move more in the direction of showing respect and realism in terms of the history with American settlers to the Native Americans. So his solution to that was take a Native American role. I don't mean to keep harping on this, but it's just such a weird kind of explanation, I think, from him. I just thought it was kind of strange that he said that. But anyway, so it is kind of, in certain ways, brand appropriation. Like I said, you're using a name people have heard of, making it kind of something else, or at least that's how it feels on first viewing. And then I realized that it's that thing where the character's not allowed to be the character until he's earned it, until he's gone through a character arc, and then at the end he's the Lone Ranger. And I didn't want that with this, but I'm trying to take the movie on its own terms, and as I'm doing that, I'm realizing that in certain ways, it does that better than a lot of other things. I found myself, lots of comparisons to different movies with this, but I found myself comparing this a lot to, of course, the superhero movie that came out a lot later, Power Rangers 2017, and it's the inverse of that, where Power Rangers 2017 had some really interesting characterization and character dynamics between its team of characters, and had characters that had more dimension to them than the original show, where they're all kind of one-dimensional. And then the third act can't land the Power Ranger stuff. It can't land the fun superhero action. And it doesn't feel like it spends that time earning it, it feels like it doesn't want to do that stuff. It feels like it would rather be making Chronicle 2 or some other kind of movie. And then you get to this movie, and it's exactly the opposite of that. It spends the whole movie trying to earn the Lone Ranger stuff, and again, at least on first viewing, where I'm not really appreciating what it's doing, and I'm distracted from the thematic elements and the plot. I'm bored with it, and I don't want to keep watching it. And then I get to the third act, and all of a sudden, it's what I came there for. And so many of these things the character doesn't become the like classic version, the definitive version of that character until the last 5-10 minutes, and you feel like you kind of wasted a movie ticket for a setup movie. This isn't exactly that, and again, spending more time with it, and I'll get more into why later, I found myself more appreciating how it got there, even if that's not what I want, and even if I think the execution of it, at least as a movie entertainment, is kind of off. I think it's demanding too much from its viewers. It's saying, you have to stay with us for 2 hours, watching maybe, again, if you know anything about Lone Ranger, maybe not what you came here for, and a lot of weirdness, a lot of maybe supernatural, maybe not. There's confusing stuff, there's contrived stuff. It's a lot less convoluted than I thought it was. The story makes sense, more or less, but I think, especially the villain plot, but I think the reason it felt so convoluted is because the structure is weird, and again, the pacing is strange, and it's just asking too much from the viewer. If I walked into the theater at the 2-hour mark, if for some reason I was that late, or I was just curious about the end of this movie and I snuck into the theater, and I'm standing in the back, and I see the Lone Ranger, I see John Reed get on his white horse, and the Lone Ranger theme plays, and he rides across that train, and you get into that brilliant, the only thing anybody talks about from this movie, that brilliant final action set piece. I would assume that the rest of the movie is good. It would be like Spawn comics. It would be like reading a random Spawn comic in the middle of any Spawn run and going, oh, this stuff must be pretty good. You put it all together and it's like, I don't know about this. So that's the biggest mistake it made. That's a lot of why I think it probably failed, at least critically. Commercially, I'm still not 100% sure how well this would have gone. I've never seen John Carter. People have said good things about that movie, and I still say if Mars had been in the title, it immediately makes at least, a few thousand more dollars. I don't know. I don't know even if that would have helped that much. That seemed like a wrong place, wrong time thing. But we've had some successful Westerns here and there, and, you had the True Grit remake that was beloved, and I think maybe won Oscars, I can't remember. This won special effects, and, or rather, didn't win, but was nominated for special effects and makeup Oscars, and absolutely deserved to be nominated for both of those, I think. Production value with this movie is lovely, and it should be for its dollar amount. By the way, let me pull that up real quick, because I don't know actually exactly how much this movie cost. It was somewhere between 225 and 250 million, and it made exactly that. It made $260 million against the 650 that it had to in order to break even with advertising and everything. Yikes. So much yikes, right? But anyway, so yeah, I would say that this movie is not style over substance. I've heard it described that way, and on a first viewing, I felt that way some. There is quite a bit going on here. Too much, honestly. I don't think it's style over substance so much as substance buried in style. I had to see it 4 times. I had to write a bunch about it. I had to really noodle it before I had any idea about a lot of what was going on in this movie. And you might say, well, Cap, you're just dense. You're not very good at keeping up with story points. And that's true, because on a first viewing with things, what jumps out at me a lot more is what the story's about, who the characters are, what their motivations are. That's what I'm invested in as as a consumer of stories, as a moviegoer, as a reader, and I know, and that's the main point of stories. Plot is secondary in good storytelling, and I know that not everybody feels that way, just what they latch onto and what they prefer, but like the point of telling a story, it's not just, here's all these things that happened. It's the whole package, right? But anyway, so, yeah, it definitely has substance. It's just, I had to dig like I was in a silver mine to find it. So, I mentioned Batman Begins, and I'm going to break down the ways in which I think it's that movie and just the things they have in common. Some of them I'm sure coincidental, some of them I'm sure not. But Austin, when he watched this movie, suggested something to me that I hadn't really thought of before, which is this movie is also kind of The Crow in, I guess, one major way, of course, which is, well, first of all, Cavendish feels like a Crow villain. One-dimensional, he's got that kind of Joker thing, just wants to watch the world burn, but he's, well, I say that, I mean, he's a psychopath. I shouldn't say it quite like that. He's a nut job. He likes anarchy because it allows him to feed his obsession with cannibalism. So it's more that. It's less the Joker thing, but they're both characters that are about chaos. And I did feel like it was trying to turn Cavendish into something of a Joker for Lone Ranger. And so it did remind me of Crow a little bit there, but what I didn't really think about is just the revenge story of it in the potential, and it's entirely ambiguous, but the potential supernatural component to this, the mysticism of it. It's like The Crow in that somebody dies and is brought back to life for maybe the potential to, I keep using that word, potential, to maybe go avenge somebody that was killed that they loved. The big difference, of course, is that our hero, and I appreciate this a lot, in The Lone Ranger, John, does not care about doing that. Obviously, he hates Cavendish for what he did. He wants to bring him to justice, but he never loses his belief that justice is not about killing, and that he is, or even if he's going to hang, I shouldn't say that. It's not just regard for life. It's not just, it's always wrong to kill someone. It's not the Batman thing of, what if I kill him? What would it do to me? How would it change me? This has nothing to do with that. This is all about due process and the rule of law and the kind of order that John Reed wants versus the kind of order that Cole wants. And I'll also get to that stuff a little bit later as well. But so it's The Crow more actually for Tonto, except he doesn't come back from the dead in order to get his vengeance. He brings someone else back from the dead to try to enact vengeance for him. So anyway, I'm going to go ahead and get into the Batman Begins stuff here in a second. I'm going to read a note that I don't know if I completely agree with anymore. This is how I always felt about this after seeing it in the theater. This, by the way, for just real quick Geekvolution history for anybody that cares, this is the first movie that we did the sign flip for, on how we felt about the green and red signs. I don't have one sitting here with me, but that we flip feeling it or not feeling it. And I was red on this one. But this was our first movie for that 9 years ago, and still using the same signs. Although one is starting to fall apart, and I'm going to have to replace that at some point. But here's how I always felt about it. I felt like it overly complicated a pretty simple origin story that you might still be able to adapt in a feature without changing too much about the character. Why does he have to be a lawyer and not a ranger in the first place? Isn't that kind of lame? And I still sort of feel that way, but for the story they're telling, see, I'm interrupting my note, but for the story they're telling, it's compelling enough. It makes sense. It's just, he's the Lone Ranger. It's weird that he wasn't a ranger in the first place. It's weird that he's the 7th ranger that didn't have any training and and we're gonna have to buy that he is as capable at the end of this movie as the standard typical Lone Ranger is. That's part of the reason that I still have a hard time with it, is that I don't, as wonderful as that scene is, I'm believing that he gets where he gets emotionally and with his worldview, but not so much with his ability. And that's where, again, the mysticism thing comes in. That was never part of Lone Ranger before. And now, because it's got to be like a Pirates movie, it's this director, I keep saying this director, I always forget his name, Gore, Verbinski. He really likes finding a mythic angle, turning things into parables or kind of ancient mythic stories. And this has kind of that 300 thing where there's a historical component to it, but it's really over the top and stylistic and unreal. There's this comic book kind of component to this. And it's bookended like that movie with someone who was there telling the story and maybe embellishing, maybe adding in a lot of mystical things that didn't really happen. In 300, it seems a little bit more consistent about it, where we can decide how ambiguous that is or not. With this, it feels like it's supposed to be that way, but what's kind of weird about it is you have a protagonist who is having to deal with a partner who may or may not be a liar, or how much of a liar is he, is kind of the question. So Tonto is constantly telling him, like, that's a spirit horse and not just a conveniently placed white horse walking around in the desert. I don't know how it got there if it's not a spirit horse. And you can't die, which is why you're going through all of these amazing dangerous situations and nothing is happening to you, even though one of the most outlandish of those, and where both characters most egregiously get out of a situation by luck, the first train sequence, the movie's bookended with train sequences, that's on purpose, and I like that a lot, by the way, but they get out of that situation by sheer luck, and it has nothing to do with the fact that John is a spirit walker, because he's not a spirit walker yet. And so there's all these places where I'm like, is it mystical or not? And then at the end of the movie, the kid that in 1933, which, by the way, it's 1933 because, of course, that's the year, it's got that Richard Donner Superman thing, where you open with, it's 1938. This one makes more sense than that. But anyway, 1933 is when The Lone Ranger premiered on radio. And this starts as a radio show. And the kid that he's telling the story to at the end says, okay, but none of this happened, right? He seems, by the way, too enamored with the story, too invested in it, to, at the end, just kind of throw his hands in the air and go, okay, but, like, you were just telling me a story, right? Like, I guess you can be gripped by fiction, but I didn't get the sense the whole movie that he thought it was fiction. And then he's like, yeah, the Lone Ranger wasn't real, and he wasn't a spirit walker, and none of these, like, fantastic things you guys did possibly could have happened. And then Tonto gives him the silver bullet and says, it's up to you to decide. But then it's also implied that he transforms into a crow. It becomes almost Birdman, where it's like, now we just have this nonsensical ending that I almost have to ignore when I'm looking at this. So, like, it's supposed to be ambiguous, but you also have a character in the story that Tonto is telling who's questioning whether any of this is mystical or not. So it's just really weird that you would embellish a story where you go, there's all of these fantastic, impossible elements to it, and then you have a character inside of it that's also wondering about any of those things. Like, I mean, I guess it's possible, it's just muddled and confusing, and I think kind of unnecessarily so. I'm already at half an hour. I don't know how that happened. I always say that, but I'm not very far into my notes yet, so I'm going to try to move a little bit faster. Thanks once again, everybody, for being here, and I will, I've got a super chat here. I'll probably look at that here in a second, before I get to some more notes. Let me break down the Batman Begins thing, and then I'll go ahead and look at that. So, it's The Lone Ranger Begins, and here are some of the ways that it's a lot like that movie. And again, I don't think all of this is coincidence. I also think that the movie feels like a Warner Brothers movie in general before it feels like a Disney movie. It's weird. I have to keep reminding myself that Disney made this movie, and it's kind of surprising how far it pushes that R rating. This is the thing I talked to Austin about today too. How far it pushes that R rating, and that's where kind of some of the tonal, what's the word I'm looking for? Inconsistencies come in, where it is. It is a little bit like tonally all over the place sometimes, where it can't decide if it's for kids or not. For the sake of, again, I got to look at this with two different hats. One of them is a tall white hat, and one of them is a conservative black hat with a more cynical guy. And the white hat part of me goes, well, I guess, well, I forgot. I've kind of lost my train of thought. I'll just go ahead and break down the Batman Begins thing. So anyway, here we go. We have an origin story for... Oh, I'm sorry. I remember what I was talking about. Just the like is this for kids thing or not? The white hat part of me says, well, for the sake of this story and thematically what it's trying to accomplish, Cavendish has to be all about chaos. And so maybe it's not going too far to make him a cannibal and go nuts with that. And the glass half empty part of me goes, that's going too far. We didn't have to do that to Cavendish if that's a character that you're already familiar with. I did my homework on this movie or on The Lone Ranger in general. I went back and watched some of the TV show, and sometimes... I'm not as familiar with source material, and this is not a thing that I'm an expert on by any stretch of the imagination. So sometimes I'll go into a movie and I won't appreciate what it is versus what it ostensibly, like from the perspective of a fan of it, like should be. And it's really easy to get bogged down in that. But on the other side of it, and not take a thing on its own terms, on the other side of it, sometimes there is that question though of, but should it have been changed? So again, I say this a lot, but I always approach these reviews with these three things in mind. This is how I critique these things. What is the movie trying to accomplish? Is it accomplishing that? And was it worth doing in the first place? And the third part of that is the kicker sometimes with adaptation. There's another super chat. I'll tackle that right after the Batman Begins thing. I'll knock both of those out. So it's an origin story with explanations for how the hero gets his outfit, his code, or I guess this isn't even an explanation for the code, but just gets into that and how he... instead of develops it, manages to hold on to it. Interestingly, versus Batman Begins, this is a character who does have a character arc, but also, at least in his philosophy, refuses to change. And Batman changes very much in his philosophy in that movie. I should also say, I meant to say this earlier, that if... Again, with adaptation, is it okay to change the spirit of the thing in any way? Sometimes you can go way too far in that direction, especially if it starts to look too cynical, I think, or if you don't appreciate the character in the first place. If you're trying to make it cool, you didn't think it was cool in the first place. This comes out the same year as Man of Steel, which has that problem. And I don't think that this is a case of trying to make Lone Ranger cooler than it is, because the character himself is kind of a wuss in the first place. If it was like, we got to make the Lone Ranger so much cooler, he would be shooting guys with his silver bullets and not caring that he kills people. One of the things I most appreciate about this is that John at least still really, again, in this iteration, John really cares about human life, but more than that, cares about like actual justice. So anyway, if I am okay with Batman not having detective work and being a ninja and wanting to at some point put the cape and cowl away, which is usually the opposite of Batman, why is it bad for Lone Ranger to come from such a different place in the first place, when at least his philosophy is intact, and when at the end of the day he's more or less that character, kind of like Batman is, even if Batman wants to hang it up. And I'm wrestling with that right now. I really am, and that's why I'm wearing two different hats. With Batman, it's easier to stomach because I had an almost spiritual experience with that movie the first time I saw it, and I did not have that with this. And that's entirely subjective and cannot be articulated. But, be it because I was a Batman fan, be it because the fear motif really grabbed me, whatever it was, that movie became a part of my soul in a way The Lone Ranger did not. But some of it also is, I'm familiar with one iteration of Lone Ranger, and there aren't a lot of different ones. Like, over the decades past the 60s, there have been attempts at doing Lone Ranger again, and I don't know how modernized and changed and getting away from the old formula and the Lone Ranger Bible they got. There's really strict rules back in the 30s to the 50s about what you were allowed to do with Lone Ranger, what it was supposed to be. And again, I'll get into that a little bit later. But Batman, I grew up with a lot of different versions. When you have a campy Batman and and super dark Batman, and then Batman's, and then stuff all in between, and you got a character that is versatile and can be done like 100 different ways, it's easier to appreciate, okay, this version is a ninja and doesn't do detective work as much as I might appreciate him doing that. I've never seen the 1981 movie. Christopher Lloyd plays Cavendish in that. I'm somewhat curious about it. It bombed. People hated it, but I'm kind of curious to go back and see that now. Again, I haven't seen the CW thing. So my point is, there might be sort of an evolution that gets us to a more modern Lone Ranger where he's not cynical, but the world he lives in is, where the piece itself is not so wholesome and innocent like the Lone Ranger TV show is. There's no corruption in that. You don't have to worry that the law is not the law. You're not going to have like mayors, and I don't know if that show ever did this, but I don't think it did, or at least if it did, it was real rare, because I know this was not what it was about. You wouldn't have had a lot of like sheriffs and governors and mayors who turned out to be like evil tycoons or evil politicians in the background, I should say, like you have with this movie. So maybe there's stepping stones to get there, but I had whiplash because it felt to me like we went from the golden age immediately to modern with like nothing in between. Anyway, so other ways in which this is like Batman Begins. It is a somewhat non-linear story with flashbacks, particularly at the beginning. So it's told kind of like that with Batman Begins, but it's more confusing in the way it handles it because it's got a double bookend and because it's got a flash forward inside of a flash forward, which is something of a new one on me, where you go, it's 1933, Tonto is explaining to this kid what the story, the lineage, the legacy of the Lone Ranger. And then he goes, and we were bank robbers. And the kid's like, well, Lone Ranger was a hero. He didn't rob banks, right? And then you're like, why is he robbing a bank right now? And then you don't know why that is for a while. And then we jump back before that, and we see Tonto before he knows John, and then he ends up meeting John on a train before John is with the Rangers and gets, and all the Rangers get killed, and him too, when he comes back to life. Or maybe he is just barely alive, and Tonto pulls him out of the grave. It's hard to tell if he was dead or not. And so it feels real convoluted in the first place, where we kind of have all these constant starts, like over and over and over again. It doesn't feel like the movie really gets started until like 35, 40 minutes in. And he's not even the Lone Ranger yet at that point. And so it's difficult to keep up with on first viewing. The protagonist has a shattering disillusionment about justice and corruption when he has a character-altering trauma. Again, it's the opposite of the one that Bruce has, but they both have that. The protagonist comes back home after a decade of training, though in this case not to be a vigilante, but to be a lawyer. Again, he's not going to get any physical training, but he maybe has powers from the great beyond, and they even refer to it that way. There is a conspiracy by a criminal who runs all the crime in the land, like Falcone in Batman Begins, and played by the same actor who played Falcone, which is nuts. Was that Tom Wilkinson? you should know that he is gonna end up being the bad guy from the beginning because of who's playing him. And there are a couple of character actors like that in this that are kind of typecast. And you're like, okay, if I was really paying attention to who was playing this guy, I would kind of know where we were going with this. The reason I didn't call it with Cole is because the movie is so long and bloated, again, on a first viewing, that I didn't even realize it was the same guy as the railroad owner, the railroad tycoon that's in the beginning, giving the speech about uniting the United States with the railroad, and then meeting Rebecca, and like none of that read creepy to me, and there was I wasn't guessing that he was going to end up being behind everything, and part of that's just I forgot about that character when we got that late into the story. I'm not sure the movie is using that as a crutch. I don't think it's doing that on purpose, but it kind of watches that way a little bit, where it's like, oh, well, here's this big reveal that's able to be a reveal because I forgot this character was even in this movie. But it's also made kind of weird because at the beginning, like I think that there is kind of an unfair. I don't want to say, I guess red herring is not the right word, but there's kind of a cheat, I think, in the way the narrative is handled, because maybe somebody can explain this to me. This is the thing I have when we get to questions, but I'm going to mention it right now, too. So, Cole says in that speech, I promise we will bring Cavendish to justice. And we find out at the end that they're actually in league together, and that Cavendish is his brother, and that it's order and chaos working together. That he believes that the way to bring the world to order is ends justifies the means, use whatever is in your arsenal, no matter who has to get hurt and killed for the sake of what he sees as the greater good. And you know, if your pocketbooks are lined and you're the one in control, all the better. But in that way, he's kind of like, he's kind of like Ra's al Ghul and Falcone put together, like sandwiched. But anyway, it's crazy that it's the same actor that plays that plays Falcone in them, or Falcone. Now it's Falcone and Falcone almost equally between different franchises. But he, I remember the point I was making, pardon me. So, he's got, Cavendish is on his way there to be hanged, and then he escapes, and then at the end of the movie, you find out that, again, they were in league together. So, why did he promise that his brother would be hanged? Like, he never had any intention of doing that, and you'd think somebody would call him on it and it would mess up his credibility. Maybe if his silver scheme works out, he's not worried about that, because once he is like primary shareholder of the company and he's got his 65 million or whatever, he feels like he's untouchable, and it doesn't matter what kind of person he is at that point. Like, he has to pretend up until he doesn't have to pretend. Maybe that's the reason. We're never given a reason, so it's just a thing I'm kind of curious about. And it might have also been that, and I'm just spitballing because we're not told, but it might have also been that he and his brother had worked out a plan where they were gonna like pretend like he was hanged. Like, they would put something under his neck and he would, you know, like do a show, or they would put something, you know, they do kind of a show thing and pretend like he died, and then when they bring him down, they don't bury him. Or they put a knapsack over somebody else's head and then pretend like it's him being hanged. I don't know. I kind of wish we'd had that scene. Well, I say that. It would be a different story if we had that. Actually, that could have been cool, though, because then Cavendish and John would both be faking their deaths at the same time, and they're on opposite sides, and it would have been cool if they had kind of the same MO while they had different motivations. But you might as well, after you've changed as much as this does from Lone Ranger. You have a, like I said, villain reveal in the third act of a character that we thought was our hero's ally. You have a climax on a train at the end with a very similar moment that's kind of like the I'm not going to kill you, but I don't have to save you situation, except it's Tonto this time that does that. And it's not spelled out that way, but it's kind of a similar moment, and our bad guy gets killed on a train, and it's not an explosion, but it gets buried under silver, which is, of course, poetic, I suppose. Then you have the bit at the end where John, just like Bruce Wayne, can't be with the girl that he is in love with, and that, by the way, his brother wanted him to take his wife, but he is going to, my wife, take her, please. No, it's not that situation. He's dying, and he's and John's like, well, I have to go, be the Lone Ranger now because we can't even trust the law anymore, and this is my purpose in life. And she kind of has that Rachel speech a little bit. She doesn't straight up say, like, if the world no longer needs Batman, but she says, if the mask starts to weigh on you, we'll be here. So kind of a similar moment. But happily, if you were able to make sequels to this, you wouldn't have to deal with a whole drama about her moving on when he feels like he is finally, past Batman. I mean, I guess you could still do that, but you wouldn't have to, you probably wouldn't play it like the promise thing, like with Rachel. It's like, well, hey, you said, I guess you could still play it that way too. They're that close. I guess you actually could do that. You have a score by Hans Zimmer, and it's a really good score, and it's, I think, in the same league as Batman Begins. I mean, I like that score better, and that's that's just my sensibilities, and I have a bias with that movie, but oh boy, it's killer, and I don't want to do that thing where it's like, well, I gotta come up with a positive. The score is good. Like, there's a lot of things about this movie that I like, especially after a few viewings, but it's spectacular, and the score it elevates the material to some degree, but it also seems to believe in the material more than I do, especially on a first viewing, and so it feels a little bit at odds with itself. Sometimes it feels like not too many cooks in the kitchen, but too many people in the kitchen all making slightly different kinds of food. Like, this score doesn't know how comedic this movie is, I don't think, and that's fine. I think it's a score for a somewhat, if not better movie, more tonally consistent movie, I should say. And it's almost the same length as Batman Begins. Everybody talks about this movie as being insanely crazy long. That's so relative, right? It's so objective. It really depends on whether you're invested in the story, whether you feel like every scene matters, whether all the elements come together to create a whole at the end, a cohesive piece. Begins is 2 hours and 20 minutes, and Lone Ranger is 2 hours and 29 minutes. It's only 9 minutes longer. It feels about 45 minutes longer, but it is. It's only 9 minutes longer than Batman Begins. Let me go ahead and tackle these super chats real quick. Are we at an hour already? That is crazy. Okay, Trenchman, $4.99 super chat. Thanks so much. Thanks for being great with your reviews ever since I was in high school. Best wishes. I really appreciate that. Thanks so much. So not a question, just a compliment and a viewer who maybe hasn't commented before, and really appreciate that. Best wishes to you as well. Game Station 3, $2 super chat. It's a PG-13 movie, not an R movie. Maybe I accidentally misspoke and said something confusing earlier. That's easy to do when you're talking about a movie like this that is kind of confusing, at least at first. But no, I was trying to say earlier that this pushes the boundaries toward R. It pushes PG-13 as close to R as I think you could get. Like, it's a little shocking that this was able to get away with the PG-13 that it has, and one of the reasons that I think it was difficult to sell to families. It doesn't really feel like a family movie until it does, and that's where I say it feels kind of tonally inconsistent at first, because, look, if you just made this movie rated, this is such a weird thing to say, but maybe I'm right about it. If sometimes I just spitball and then I'll say a thing, I'm like, that was dumb, I shouldn't have said that, but I'm going to try this. So if this movie was rated R, I actually don't think it would feel as tonally inconsistent as it does at PG-13. R would tell you who it's for. R would tell you kids aren't supposed to be watching it. So when you have a bookend with a child in it that wants to be the Lone Ranger, and the movie by the end is saying this is a character to be looked up to and who is a role model and all of that, but the way you get there is real violent, and you have a cannibal, and you've got some kind of bloody scenes, and you've got just some weird subject matter. You've got adult subject matter. You've got some almost grindhouse elements, like with Helena Bonham Carter with her wooden gun leg. Is it wooden? I'm not sure what it's made out of. But her gun leg, because her leg got eaten by Cavendish and all of that. You would maybe not cry foul on it as much, going, this can't decide what audience it's for, or it's weird to even have a kid in it. If it was rated R, like I think those elements would read like they're just appealing to an adult's nostalgia or remembering their own childhood. Like, it's not like you can't have any wholesomeness in a movie that is rated R. It is difficult to get away with some of this level of violence and adult subject matter and stuff in a movie that is supposed to be for families. Going the other way with it makes it feel kind of tonally uneven. This movie is, and this is another thing that Austin and I talked about today. He mentioned Crow. He also mentioned RoboCop. That's another thing that I hadn't thought about. So I have to give him credit for the few points that he brought up that I had not considered. It is like RoboCop. So you've got, and I'm bringing another thing to this. He mentioned that it's like RoboCop in that you have a bad guy that you think is the main bad guy who almost kills the protagonist. And then it turns out that he's working for somebody even scarier who's a manipulator who's on the top, like Ronnie Cox's character in RoboCop. But, you've got a business overlord who's in control of everything, and it's even more than that, though. He's also, just like Ronnie Cox's character, got a plan to, change the land, to change the area around them so that he'll be in permanent control. So in that movie, it's Detroit. Here, it's just the U.S. at large in connecting everything by railroad. And then, it's like whoever owns the railroad, owns the country. I think it was John Early, maybe, or somebody else in the comments before it started that said that it reminded them of Roger Rabbit, because the villain plot is kind of like that. Establish the freeway, and then you control where people go and what you bypass and all of that. But of course, you also have a lawman or a cop with RoboCop that is nearly killed, has a rebirth, and has to work outside the law in order to achieve justice, which is, by the way, the reason that both of these things are superhero movies. And if you made something more straight original Lone Ranger, not RoboCop, I would still say it counts well enough in the superhero arena, kind of like a Batman or something, because you still have a sort of vigilante. Like, he works outside of the law in that he's wearing a ranger badge. Like, he's still sort of part of the law. He's a lot closer to a straight-up vigilante here, because he, like with RoboCop, has to go up against the authorities. And that's not usually what Lone Ranger does. So he's closer, actually, to that 1966 Batman thing of, like, the duly deputized agent of the law that happens to wear a mask. So he works by himself, and he works sort of outside of the law, but he works very much with the law, and not just in that, like, Jim Gordon Batman relationship way, but he'll break a lot of rules. Like, 66 Batman doesn't break rules, and neither does the original Lone Ranger. So I would still do another Lone Ranger movie, and I guess if I'm reviewing every superhero movie ever made and I'm saying the Lone Ranger movies count, I'd have to do the 81. I would have to maybe do that CW thing, if that counts as a movie, and anything else that was made. But it's closer to proto-superhero or pulp hero before we're, like, straight up calling them superheroes, or just as we start to. So, like a Phantom or something, but it's kind of splitting hairs. Like, it still is. It's just, like, I've always said RoboCop's a superhero, and people have gone up against me and said, well, he's a cop, so he's not a superhero. And I'm like, yeah, but he's, at least in that movie, but he's having to leave the law and go up against the authorities. He's now a vigilante, even though he looks like a cop and his name is RoboCop. And that's kind of what you have here. So that really puts it over the top, whether you like that take or not. Okay, let's break down the themes real quick. I'm hoping my voice holds out, but I'm going to try. Okay, here's the themes that I found in this movie. Justice, freedom, and the illusion of those things that a corrupt state can create. Again, things that the Lone Ranger usually is not about. This is usually more of a Batman side of things, but I like that we have what is, as like I said to Austin earlier, this feels almost like if Clark Kent didn't have superpowers but was still the same kind of character as Clark Kent, and then had a tragic backstory like Batman as an adult and then turned into Batman. It's like this would be maybe a cool sort of backstory for a Batman 66, where you have a character that wears a mask, but his sensibilities and his values are very much Superman. You have Destiny versus Free Will, of course, which I think is mostly just used as a crutch to get our characters out of difficult situations, and I really don't like that. And it's, like I said earlier, it could be ambiguous about it, but I think it's really muddled about it before it's just ambiguous. There's the question of how easily evil can come to power in the midst of chaos. So Lone Ranger is usually about the lawless West, and somebody needs to come in and do something, and you have individual police departments in different towns, but the frontier is wide open, and there's very little you can do against a Cavendish. And so it's not about conspiracy like this is, and usually, and so this just takes it a step further and says, okay, well, when you have that lawless West, how easy would it be for somebody to come in and say, be kind of the evil Lone Ranger and say, look, I'm creating order, and that doesn't actually have people's best interest at heart. And then there's on the Tonto side, there's the element of madness, and maybe whether some madness is necessary to go against your survival instinct and fight oppression and unjust authority. There's the question of who is a hero, a man of high stature who works within the system safely to help people, like John would do if he was a district attorney. I also had the thought that this is like if Harvey Dent became Batman, or an adventurer who works outside of the system and puts himself in danger to help people. Tonto has the line that I think is a major crux of thematically of this narrative. There comes a time, Kemosabe, when good man must wear mask. When the law fails us, or there is no law, good people must put their personal lives aside and do the right thing. The mask represents justice and anonymity, not deception. And that's a big difference between, and that's consistent with the Lone Ranger. Generally speaking, I mean, part of the reason that he has to put the mask on at the end of this is because he realizes he's actually getting people hurt. And you could say this version of the Lone Ranger is actually responsible for some deaths before he becomes the superhero at the end and finally does what the movie at least says is the right thing. Early on, he refuses to kill Cavendish, and then Cavendish gets away, and then his brother gets killed, and all the Rangers get killed, and he almost dies as well. Not to mention everybody else that Cavendish probably killed along the way. And you realize that you wouldn't even have a movie if he would just allow Tonto to fire that gun. And there's a part of me that's like, in that particular situation, I'm not sure a lawman would make the decision he did, but at least like in the West, but he would be dishonest and not responsible and not upholding the law if he did anything different there, certainly. So I'm not saying that like he did the wrong thing and that he should be held responsible. I just think it's kind of interesting. Like I thought it was funny at first, and now that I'm thinking about it, I actually kind of like the choice where it's like his value system creates the story. Like none of the rest of this happens, at least with him, without that. And then also Cole probably ends up taking over the railroad because he wouldn't have, the resistance from the Lone Ranger. Cole also kind of brings himself down to some degree because I don't really understand why he explains his plan to the Lone Ranger. It has one of those, it's one of those kind of typical comic book plots of the villain has to tell the hero what his whole plan is. Then there's an identity question. The Lone Ranger dies and has a rebirth. The mask represents his new self. He's not the man he was, and he even resists it. Like, he is changing, but then toward the end, he takes the mask back off. He's like, no, I'm going to be the district attorney. I'm going to do this right. And he realizes that the system is broken, like with Batman Begins, and he can't do that. And so he goes into the mask rather than the mask reflecting who he really is. He's not Spider-Man. And he kind of has to fake it till he makes it, to some degree. And then there is the familial thing, brothers, family, and its relation to fate. Some of the way fate is handled, destiny is handled in this, I don't like, and some of it I'm fine with. The idea that you don't choose your family, and maybe not even who your friends are that become like family, is pretty good. And I didn't really appreciate that until this particular viewing. Okay, now I'm going to break down character motivations. So the focus on the character arcs and the kind of parallels and contrasts in this movie with the characters. I do this a lot with movies. I can't always find this because movies aren't always thoughtful enough, and not that every movie needs to be structured like this, but movies aren't always, in stories in general, and they don't have to, trying to explore an idea through characters with a lot of different worldviews that all fit on kind of a line, like I often like to do. But this one does kind of have that. The focus is on how each of them views law and order. So John Reed says toward the beginning, I think this is a good kind of foundation for his character. John Locke's Treatise of Government is his Bible. He says, where this train's headed, there's no room for men who carry guns. I'm paraphrasing. He's going to the future. And I really love the way that line is bookended at the end, where he realizes that the future might not be the way he thought it was, and he has to change tack in order to do his best to help it get there. And that maybe what he wanted wasn't even entirely right in the first place. It's not all about progress. This movie's also a lot about justice versus the notion of technological progress. He believes, maybe naively, entirely naively, I shouldn't have said maybe, in the rule of law, and doesn't realize it's not effective until the Rangers are killed. Like Bruce when his parents are killed in Begins. He cares about the preservation of life, and at least until the right party decides that life should be taken. It's interesting that he doesn't really talk at all about capital punishment. I'm going to assume that in this particular day and age, if someone does a heinous enough crime and they get their fair trial and the jury decides to hang them, this particular character would probably go along with that and would think that that was righteous and just. But he's not going to be judge, jury, and executioner. He's the opposite of Tonto in that way, and he's like, Tonto is kind of like a punisher, or would like the Lone Ranger to be like a Judge Dredd. And the Lone Ranger eventually will get to a place where he doesn't take his mask off, like Judge Dredd won't take his helmet off, but they're in opposite places with that. He does give us the typical hero's journey. He doesn't want to be a hero. He resists the call. He just wants to be a lawyer, so he wants to be like Harvey Dent in The Dark Knight, a hero without a mask, with a face. And he learns his responsibility to justice because he can't trust the law, like I've already said repeatedly. He sees black and white at first, then realizes good and the law are not always the same thing. Now we'll contrast with that with Tonto, who believes in the law of nature, and both of them are having, I don't know if I can say a disillusionment in Tonto's case, but both of them are wrestling with their respective laws, and it's kind of an odd parallel. I just thought of this, so I didn't write this down. So John is finding that he can't trust the people that are in charge, are in power necessarily. And, it's more about a corporation than it is about the government, but they're in league together, and the corporation is affecting what the government does. So it is still that. And then Tonto is not sure about the law of nature because he thinks nature is out of balance. And that's played for comedy a lot, and it's part of what's confusing about the supernatural thing and just how supernatural things are supposed to be with this movie. But anyway, so he cares about his righteous vengeance over anything else, including the lives sometimes of innocent people, which puts him a little bit closer to Cavendish in some places. Although, of course, he's not actually a savage. Cavendish is the real savage. Sometimes, and I also really like this, I think his buttons are pushed even more with the mistake he made in the past with taking the pocket watch from the white men that killed his people, because they acted like savages, but he made that happen, or he takes responsibility for it. He is guilty about it, and so it makes him feel like a savage, and he can't have that. I might be reading too much into that, but I really think that's there. Sometimes killing is necessary and never done with waste. The kind of Native American code of, and at least with his tribe, but of course just in general, he has a whole speech about how when we kill, it's we leave nothing to waste. And why does the white man kill? What is the reason? Look at all the waste. And it's really interesting. I don't know what to do with this. I don't think there's a real read here, but I just think it's interesting when he has that speech. There's not supposed to be any waste. Like, he will kill a human being if he thinks it's necessary, while for the sake of his righteous vengeance. And he thinks that white men are killing all the time, the people the settlers that have come to his country, for not a noble or righteous enough reason, and that's like waste with hunting and not eating the animal. But we have a cannibal in this movie, and that makes that whole thing a little bit weird, where, well, Cavendish is supposed to be the Wendigo, as described by Tonto, the evil spirit, and he's supposed to be the antithesis to everything that Tonto believes in, and yet there's not very much waste when he kills someone because he eats them. I don't know what to do with that. It's a weird connection. I don't know that it's intentional. But anyway, so Tonto has a redemptive arc. He needs to get revenge to pay penance for his own mistake, which was, again, selling his tribe for a watch. He sees the world in black and white. Good people live, bad people die, and also related to that is his, and it was this last viewing before I picked up on this too, he has, see, this is a really involved movie. There's a lot more going on here than I thought there was, and it's not as random and pointless, just a bunch of stuff that happens like I thought it was. Tonto has a bartering system, and that's part of his black and white view of the world. If you take something, you give something back in equal trade. And sometimes what he thinks is equal trade is debatable, and there's some comedy played for that. But if you want something, you give someone something that they want for the thing that you want. It's simple. And then you look at both Johnny and Tonto at various points in their lives, and they trust authority blindly and pay for it. That's the big thing that they have in common. So they don't like each other through most of the movie, which is one of the things that made it very difficult to get through the first couple of times, because I kind of just want the Lone Ranger and Tonto to be friends and get along and move on. I don't need the typical like buddy cop thing. of this, constant animosity because they look at things so totally different. They can't find any common ground. It just feels real typical, and it feels like a crutch to create drama and comedy. But I don't know. Again, maybe I'm drinking the Kool-Aid with this movie. I'm starting to appreciate it a little bit more than I did before. But they trust authority blindly at one point and pay for it. One becomes the Punisher, the other Batman, like I said before. Both are disillusioned vigilantes that have to trust their own sense of right and wrong apart from the law. Then you have Cole, who is all about order and control through any means necessary. As I said earlier, he wants to create illusion of freedom. A law and order, yes, but one that he controls. Uniting the country really means access to everywhere so he can spread his tendrils and rule like a mob boss. It reads like a commentary on the evils of a corrupt federal government, even though he is running a business. He's trying to take over the government as well. He and John want the same thing, order and a united country, but Cole is willing to do any manner of evil to get there while John sticks to his principles. So again, ends-based ethics versus virtue ethics. Nothing accomplished without sacrifice, he says. Once again, Ra's al Ghul and Falcone combined, kind of. Cavendish is the opposite extreme of him and kind of Tonto in weird ways, I suppose. He serves whoever will create a world that will allow him to run wild. He wants the true Wild West, even under a corruption that masquerades as law. No regard for human beings, because he eats them, and he's hardly human himself. I think even if there is any mystical component to this movie, by the end we're supposed to believe that there are no Wendigos. There are just people who make bad decisions and become horrible people. But I'm never 100% sure. It's like, was that actually a spirit horse? That's what I keep going back to. Does John actually have literal plot armor? I don't know. John wants to avenge himself against the evil and bring it to civilized justice. Cole wants to control it. Neither wants to destroy it like Tonto does. And Cavendish, of course, is that evil. That's why I put that there. And then we have, and this is a character I've not brought up yet, but we have Danny, who is kind of like a young Bruce Wayne inside of a movie with a kind of Bruce Wayne counterpart, which is interesting. He is an impressionable child caught in the crossfire of a war between two potential father figures. John, who believes in the ideals his father did, but is realizing his rigid belief in the law was naive, and Cole, who would groom him to become a ruthless businessman or politician. So it's control versus fair and just law. Danny represents the future that John is talking about at the beginning, a future that could go either way. I really like that shot toward the end. A lot of symbolism. Some of it's kind of heavy-handed, but there's this shot toward the end after Cavendish says to John, like, what was that you said about riding to the future? And then he's got that great line about, this train's going to hell! And John's like, that's fine! There's this great fork in the road where it could go in either direction, and that's great. The symbolism there is clear, but I don't think horribly heavy-handed. I like that. It suggests that the American experiment is still unproven and uncertain. So Danny chooses the right side at the end and helps John defeat the bad guys, and I like and actually buy his involvement, but because John is not able to just go back and become one with the law again, it suggests that there will always be some kind of level of corruption, and he's always going to have to try to balance that out. Okay, I'm going to do this very quickly, because this might be boring to some people. But I kind of wanted to mention this just in case you weren't familiar, and because initially it was really bugging me all the ways in which this wasn't the Lone Ranger, where I was like, a lot of change for the sake of change, you're too cool for school, you don't like this character. Now I'm realizing it's a Smallville-level reimagining, and when you look at that last scene, there's no way these guys don't like the Lone Ranger. And then you get to the very end, and the kid says, you never take off the mask, and that comes up a couple of times. So even though we have a Lone Ranger that does take off his mask, he's not the Lone Ranger yet, until by the end he finally puts it on and never takes it off. Now, if we had a sequel and he kept pulling it off all the time, I would cry foul on that. But you have a proto-Lone Ranger just like you have a proto-Batman. The difference is it takes him longer to fully become and embrace the ideas of that character. Maybe not the ideas, but just the idea of being a vigilante. Although there's still stuff Bruce wrestles with, too. I just feel like when Bruce Wayne puts on his Batman suit the first time and goes and gets Falcone, who's in this movie, he's Batman from frame one when you see that suit. The Lone Ranger puts on his mask, he's not Lone Ranger yet. He's not Lone Ranger until he puts the mask on the last time and says he will never take it off. So, this is the ways in which this movie goes away from traditional Lone Ranger, in case you care. Skip ahead when this is not live, if you don't. Tonto is the brains here and the competent one, even though he's also crazy. On first viewing, it played to me like Hong Kong Phooey, where John was like a buffoon and he had a sidekick that had to do everything. But now I'm getting more of what I think it's doing, and I appreciate John's motivations and worldview getting in his way and having a character arc that brings him to a place between Tonto and Cole's ideologies. At first, I thought he was just a klutz, and he was terrible at everything because he was just book smart and stuff. And once I realized what his character arc was about, it read less that way to me. I feel like I've seen two kind of different movies with this. It's not saying I don't still have big issues with it, because I do, but boy, my score is bouncing back and forth. I actually have two in mind right now. Usually I've picked my score by now, and it won't be until the very end that I've decided between which of those two. But it's already up from where it was yesterday, regardless. I still don't like, though, that John can't come up with anything himself. The movie never fully wins me over on that. The mask is Tonto's idea. The silver bullet is Tonto's idea. Everything. John is not a trained ranger here. He's a district attorney, again, looked down on by his brother for playing it safe and being book smart instead of street smart, and he has a love triangle with his brother and his wife. I'm pretty sure all of that is manufactured. Maybe that shows up in another place, I'm not sure, but that felt made up for this movie. Dan it feels like sort of a proto-Lone Ranger, like the movie talks about him like the guy that you expect to be the Lone Ranger. That always reads really lame to me, where it's like, this is the guy you actually came to see, but we're going to be all cute about it and give you this other person that has to spend the whole movie figuring out how to get there. And I'm more won over by that than I used to be, but there are too many risks to keep most people in their seats, I think. It goes to too many of those places. But he's more like the traditional Lone Ranger in the first place, while John has to start from scratch. This makes it a typical modern hero's journey, as I said, which Lone Ranger really usually isn't. I've already broken that down, so I won't go into that again. Tonto buries John in this version. Usually John is just still alive, and Tonto takes him to a nearby spring to revive him and buries the other 5 bodies, and then pretends to bury a 6th one. It has what looks like a grave, but there's no body in it, so that not John usually, but so that Reed can fake his own death and be the Lone Ranger and be this larger-than-life character that is a symbol for justice and freedom. I haven't mentioned yet, I'll just tack this on real quick, again, in case you're not familiar, the connection with the Green Hornet, because both of those characters' last name is Reed. I wondered about that for a while, didn't realize that these were actually created by the same guys, and I have not name-dropped that yet, and just cannot remember their names, so I should probably do that. But it's Fran Stryker and George W. Trendle created both of those characters, and they're actually supposed to be in the same continuity. So the Green Hornet would be a descendant of the Lone Ranger. He would be like a grandson, maybe a great-grandson, maybe just a grandson. And that's dealt with and played with in various iterations of those characters. And interesting that, this is one of the reasons I wanted to bring that up, by the way, interesting that they created 2 sets of characters with a sidekick. Neither is a kid sidekick in a period where there were tons of those, particularly once you got into the 40s, and in comics and in pulps. maybe not pulps, but certainly comics. And you had both of them very capable with a different skill set, and both of them of a different ethnicity that came from a different place. So, I mean, I guess less so with Tonto, because, like, he's native. They're both from the same place, but you know what I mean. Different ethnicities with different cultures. And you have, not too long before this, a comedic Green Hornet movie made by Seth Rogen, which I also have not done a rewind on yet, that kind of has a similar thing to this, even though that's played up more for comedy, but I think it's in some ways a more cohesive watch. Like, I don't know if that's technically a better movie. It's not as interesting of a story as this. It's a little bit by the numbers, and it's not what you would want for that character. This isn't what a lot of people want for Lone Ranger either, but in some ways this is like closer in tone to what you would think a modern Lone Ranger would be like, and Green Hornet, not at all. But Kato in that is the much more capable of the two, and kind of has to make things happen for Britt Reed, who's a name that I do not buy an actor like Seth Rogen playing. I don't buy Seth Rogen ever being named Britt Reed. But anyway, and then you have the same thing with Tonto with this. It's, once again, Tonto's idea for John to wear the mask, because he has to do everything. John doesn't want to in the first place. The point initially is to fake his death in the original. That doesn't come until a lot later with this. Once again, the whole Lone Ranger not supposed to appear without his mask thing, and this doesn't get there till the end, so we do see him without his mask. In the pilot of the TV show, if you go, I think 1954, if you go back to that, even you've got the 6 Rangers going after Cavendish, and the guy who will become the Lone Ranger, you don't know which of them it is, and you don't see his face. And when he is rescued by Tonto, you still don't see his face. And when he gets Tonto to make the mask, which is, by the way, made out of his brother's coat, I think, some article of clothing from his brother, he has his face turned from the camera, so you can't see what he looks like until he puts the mask on. So you don't get a straight-up face shot of him until he's got the mask on. That was a big thing that the two guys that made this always wanted for the Lone Ranger. Tonto is not a crazy person in the original. He's not banished from his own tribe. He doesn't have to redeem himself for a terrible Judas-level mistake of any iteration that I've read about anyway. John and Tonto don't get along here, and they usually do. You have the whole thing about Tonto wishing that John's brother had made it instead of him. The chains in the opening train scene represent these two guys being fated to be together through providence and not mutual respect or camaraderie. That's all totally opposite and different. The Kemosabe thing is weird, because in the original, that means trusty scout. And in this, we don't know what it means, because Tonto lies about everything. And on this last viewing, I got more of a sense, and I had not noticed some of these little details before, that Tonto is supposed to maybe secretly appreciate and respect John from the beginning, and is just messing with him and pretending not to. And he feels a lot more endearing and, like, playful and, in weird ways, more respectable by the end during the big train scene. Like, suddenly I'm liking Depp's performance a lot more and liking Tonto as a character a lot more once everything's come together. Again, opposite of 2017 Power Rangers, it's a movie where nothing seems to be coming together and then it all works by the end. But I don't know that it was necessarily worth the path getting there. And anyway, so he tells John, Kemosabe mean wrong brother. And he's just messing with him. And then when you get to the end of the movie, it seems like you never get the reveal of what Kemosabe actually means. And I think that's maybe kind of a mistake. So maybe that actually is what it means. It's weird. But then if he actually does feel that way about it, and he is pretending like it's Kemosabe, or that Kemosabe means, pardon me, if where am I going with this? If Kemosabe doesn't mean wrong brother, and he didn't respect John in the first place, why would he name him Trusty Scout and then not tell him that? Because he's not a Trusty Scout to him. He wishes he got the other guy. So it probably has to be that. And I just wish that that was revealed by the end. Some other stuff that I mentioned here, but I'm going to skip ahead a little bit because, good Lord, we're already at an hour and a half, and I don't even know how that works. I will start looking at comments again here in a little bit, folks. Sorry about that. Okay. Cavendish is now a gross, deranged, cannibalistic psychopath who works for a corrupt corporate tycoon. Originally, he is his own boss, has his own gang, and just takes out the Rangers, not for any conspiracy, but just to keep his criminal enterprise going. Cavendish doesn't originally keep Collins alive right after they kill the Rangers. He is also more sympathetic in this version than he is there. I kind of like what's done with him when he lets Rebecca and her son live. There is no real supernatural component before now. I guess we've talked about quite a bit of this. The bad guys generally weren't allowed to be well off or have positions of authority in the original Lone Ranger material, because it wasn't, again, about corruption. It was about lack of authority. Lone Ranger owns his own silver mine in the original and uses it to forge bullets as a symbol of law and justice. Not here. We just have the one bullet and a silver mine, but it's not Lone Rangers, and the whole story has to be about silver. So then here are the things that they did keep intact from all of that. The theme song, the William Tell Overture, which is used amazingly by Zimmer in that last scene. The whole movie is almost worth that. You almost wish you could, like, watch the last half hour. And, like, as weird as the structure already is, I kind of wish that it just opened with the last half hour and then went, okay, here's how we got there. Like, I'd probably turn it off at some point, but I'd still like the movie more. This Lone Ranger has the same regard for life in aversion to killing of the original. I mentioned that. He still will use a gun, but not to kill. There is one scene that threw this off for me. I'm not kidding when I say this. On first viewing, I did not understand John's philosophy at all. I didn't realize that he had such a regard for life, even though his whole character arc is predicated on that. One scene messed it up for me. Well, I was missing a lot of the point of that in the discussion about that early on, because I was like, this guy's a doofus. How is he the Lone Ranger? And I was just stuck on that. It was distracting. That's on me, but that's how I felt about it. It made it difficult to appreciate what was happening. And then you get the scene where they're in the desert, and there were posters for this, and the movie was sold on this quite a bit. They get buried alive in the desert by the tribe that Tonto used to be in, and it's the scene with the scorpions. Everything about the scene is bizarre, and I don't like it. Overall, I don't like the scene. And John escapes the being buried alive, and he just leaves Tonto there, and the only reason he seems to come back is because Tonto has information he needs and can get them to go where they need to go. If he didn't have that, would he have just left him there? And then wouldn't that go against his entire philosophy if he just left Tonto to die? Because it's a comedic scene, you're not supposed to be thinking about it, but I can't help it. I'm like, but why does he leave for a second? Like, he's never... And yes, he does ultimately come back, but only because Tonto has something he needs, it seems like. So that seems very inconsistent and against his worldview. It's the only scene like that, though. But it was hard not to feel like the whole movie was mean-spirited when I saw that the first time. I mentioned the whole thing about Reed not always having a first name. Tonto does sometimes have a bird. I don't think he does it all in the TV show, but there's various iterations where he does. Usually it's, alive. The Lone Ranger has a silver bullet. So he I don't know if he's going to keep using that, and if it's going to mean the same thing that it does in the show. He's got a horse named Silver. and Tonto and the Lone Ranger do meet before Tonto saves his life, like in the show, but not as teenagers, like in that show. Here, it's days before John nearly dies. In other versions, Reed's brother also leaves behind a son named Danny, like here, and Collins is the name of the same guy in the show that is the mole working for Cavendish. So it takes quite a bit from that, but it also deviates a ton. Okay, let's see what people are talking about in the comments here. John G, soundtrack is incredible. It really is. Madman, that's cold. Right? John G, abandoning Tonto is bad. Yeah, exactly. I just don't... I think that was a misstep. The Thinking Cat. Hi. The Green Hornet was actually his car originally, as it used an air collector for a supercharger in the engine that makes a buzzing noise and has sustained speed over 80 miles per hour. I did not remember that. Nintendo Raimi, bro, you need to come over and play some pinball. Hi there. How you doing? I would love to. So I'm really surprised that he's watching right now, and it's really neat of you to be here. He sold me my first digital pinball machine, and is here in the area, and that just blindsided me. It's so nice to see you here, and I will definitely take you up on that. I'd love to see what new machines you have. His home arcade is incredible. It's amazing. But I digress. Thinking Cat still talking about Green Hornet. I will not read more of those right now because we're talking about this movie, but at some point I'll get to that movie and then we can do more of that. Madman, if your intention was to fake out the audience and make people believe that the brother was the Lone Ranger, I don't think it was. You shouldn't have included the bank robbery scene in the beginning where we see John. Yeah, I don't think we're supposed to think that. I think the idea is just, isn't it supposed to be clever for some reason that here's this guy who's more like the character you thought was going to become the Lone Ranger, but it's actually this guy, and how in the world is he going to get there? It's that Smallville thing of everybody's got to be their opposites, right? Okay, I have a whole litany of good things and bad things, and we are at an hour 40, and I think I will go ahead and read these down real quick. So, I'll skip some things, but in the category of good things, I mentioned score earlier. It's wonderful. Particularly, I like the main romantic melody, which plays when we first meet John and then throughout the movie, and reminds me of the theme from Field of Dreams. I also love the trumpet work, especially in the scene where the Rangers go after Cavendish in the first place. There is a solid espionage conspiracy plot with Cade and Cavendish that makes sense and creates a natural character arc for John to become the modern Lone Ranger. I resist it because it breaks so many of the original rules for the character, like I said earlier, and I'm used to different versions of other heroes, but not this one. So yeah, the whole skipping the Golden Age thing. I've mentioned a lot of things that I've got listed here. But taking it on the movie's own terms, a lot of this actually really works. But it's hard to track on a first viewing because the structure is strange and it feels bloated and there are too many distractions. The violence, Tonto's strange behavior, the contrived resolutions to action scenes, they're like Batman 66 death traps if Batman didn't do anything himself to get out of them. Some lovely cinematography in this movie. Everything looks great. Landscapes are awesome. I love the shot with young Tonto behind the dead man's hand holding the pocket watch. That's one of the most Pirates kind of shots in the movie, but it's kind of suited in my brain. I like it a lot. Really obvious symbolism with the pocket watch, but I don't care. I don't think the question of the future and progress and whether that's more important than people holding on to freedom and their souls. And that's why Tonto has to give up his tribe for the symbol of progress. Makeup is wonderful. Tonto as an old man is really good. I kind of could do without that bookend. I think the movie is better if you take that whole thing out. And I get why it's there, but I think it confuses things before it adds enough. And that would go a long way to making the movie a little bit less bloated, but also a little bit less confusing, at least initially. So Climax of the train is killer. That's the one thing everybody loves, and it's impressively storyboarded and choreographed, edited, scored, etc., etc. The bookend with the railroad and the unassuming villain who's announcing its construction is not a thing I appreciated on first viewing. I forgot we even had that train sequence at the beginning. I didn't realize, because I'd just been there too long, and I didn't realize what it was doing. That it's establishing these two guys who will become very different by the end, and then seeing them work well together, and seeing just how far the Lone Ranger has come, whether or not you believe some of the things that he's able to do with his gun and riding on his horse, and being so confident to drop the woman of his dreams down off a train and hope that the horse will catch her. It's just easy to forget. It's just easy to forget that that's there because of the framing device. That's also bookending, like I said earlier. I said earlier, good job making Cole's evil reveal a surprise. I also think it's cheating a little bit, but I'll stand by that to some degree. The casting of Dan is really good. James Dale, he exudes experience, compassion, and sense of duty. It is sad when he dies. I also love the casting of the brothel owner, Helen Bonham Carter. Hit and miss. Sometimes like her, sometimes don't. But she's really good in this. Sometimes the humor does land. It's hit or miss. But here's some exchanges I liked, some banter. I haven't fired a gun in 9 years. Might want to keep that to yourself, Kimasabi. That's pretty good. Great shot. That was supposed to be a warning shot. In that case, not so good. And there's also some good dialogue like this. Cole, about the nitroglycerin at the end. Put it somewhere safe. His henchman says, where would that be? And he says, use your imagination. One thing that made me immediately appreciate this movie more as I started doing my note-taking watch is I have my questions section, and I started writing questions and then realizing that the thing I was writing a question about actually made sense, and I deleted lots of them before I finished writing them, and that suggests that the story is better than I thought it was. I like that John doesn't robotically change his mind about justice and have an uncontrollable urge to kill Cavendish when he has the chance. I alluded to this earlier, but not everyone reacts the same way when somebody they care about is killed. We do this this is such a movie trope, and I hate it, where no matter who the person is, I know I'm going to get flack for saying this again, and I haven't reviewed this on Rewind yet, but like the first thing that comes to mind is Tony Stark at the end of Civil War. I love that movie, but that's a bit that it's just like, well, he finds out that this guy killed his mom years ago, and now even though he knows that guy's not responsible, he is almost entitled by, or pardon me, I shouldn't say entitled. He's forced by the story to go after him now. Like, he's obliged to do that because that's what characters do when they find out somebody... Well, not necessarily. Not everybody reacts the same way. He also wasn't close with his brothers, so it's even more believable. I like how something feels a little off with Cole at the point where he says, I've prayed for God to send me a family to care for. That's toward the end in the train. Not the big exciting set piece, but in the dark, in the night sequence. I'm still not sure if he's behind a conspiracy or not, but now I'm starting to suspect him. There's a foreboding tension there with him until the reveal, which is better than if suddenly there's a turn and he's acting like a one-dimensional bad guy. His performance does change after that, but it's eased into, and I like that a lot. It's weird because I didn't even notice that it was the same actor from Falcone and Batman Begins the first time I saw this until you get to the end, and he starts talking more like that. We have probably talked enough about the train climax, but I gotta say, on this last viewing, everything came together, at least thematically and character-wise, even with scenes I don't like and pacing that's wonky and all of that stuff. And I'm not kidding about this. There's a moment, and I forget exactly what it is, but with John, where like I actually teared up a little bit on a fourth viewing. That actually finally happened with me. It's so weird. There's a perfect image in this movie. It's brilliant. It's what it should have been the posters. the Lone Ranger finally embraces his mask. He's on horseback. He's in front of the courthouse, which he is desperate to make mean what it is supposed to, and the Lone Ranger theme is playing behind him. That's perfect. That's exactly like there should have been an equivalent of that in Power Rangers 2017 when they finally morph or get their Zords. It's perfect. I like what we do with Tonto's tribe at the end. That they basically are just sitting around waiting to die and have decided that their tribe isn't even a tribe anymore. And then Tonto convinces them. This was a thing that took me a couple of viewings to realize was happening. But Tonto gets them to come back, and the sacrifice is sad, and yes, John is somewhat responsible for it, but it's good that they get to do something and that their lives have meaning at the end. How do you not love a wooden leg gun? It's a little like something in Wild Wild West, which this movie sometimes has shades of in its pacing, and that's kind of a problem. Like, at first, when I wasn't liking this movie as well as I suddenly am now, I felt like there was too much Jonah Hex and too much Wild Wild West in this movie. You know, it had, like, the weirdness of Jonah Hex and the, like pacing and kind of too over-the-topness of, Wild Wild West. We already talked about the pocket watch. Okay, I'll go into a few more bad things. I have talked a lot about my criticisms with this movie. I'm actually scrolling through this right now to see if there's very much that I haven't already brought up. I do think, I don't feel this as much this way now, but on earlier viewings, and I think this is one of the things that might maybe turned off people, at least that like the Lone Ranger. It's kind of like if you did a story, an origin story for Batman, and Robin had to teach Batman how to be Batman. Supernatural plot armor. Doesn't play the classic lore straight. Some of this is more okay for me now, and some of it's not. So if the idea is you have a somewhat more, even in a heightened piece, you have a somewhat more believable or realistic way of evolving John into becoming the Lone Ranger, some of these things maybe make sense, but sometimes it does still feel like that reverential humor thing where it can't just play the silly stuff straight and just treat them like part of the world. I don't like when Dan makes fun of his hat, but then that might just be kind of a character thing where it's like not everybody's saying the hat looks stupid. It's just Dan going, look, that's too silly. Like, he doesn't like how naive and overly optimistic his brother is. So maybe that works okay. But initially it sits wrong with me. And then making fun of Hi-Ho Silver at the end, I don't like. Leave it out if you're going to do that. I still stand by that. He has to bring up that Tonto means something else in Spanish. It's almost like they looked at, some of the research that I did before this and were like, here's a silly thing that we can work in that we know about the Lone Ranger. In other countries, they have to, in Spanish-speaking countries, they have to change Tonto's name because Tonto means, like, I can't remember if it's, I don't speak Spanish, I can't remember if it's like stupid or fool or guy who can't accomplish anything. I forget what exactly it is, but it's the opposite of what Tonto's supposed to be, so they have to call it something different. And you throw that in here, it's like an Easter egg, and then it's like, okay, what are the Spanish-speaking countries going to do now? Because they have to keep his name as Tonto, because now it's a story point. We do that thing where we have to have a cute way for the character to come up with his name. This is a big trope. I can't think of another example, but I know I have talked about at least one other example of this where you have two different people in the movie. What is it? It's on the tip of my tongue. You have two different people in the movie that come up with the hero's name independently. And that seems contrived enough. It's like two different people call him Lone Ranger. And then, at the very end, he still can't decide what to call himself, even though two different people have called him the Lone Ranger. It's not fanforstic bad, but I don't like it. Oh, and last and probably biggest criticism next to some of the contrived issues is at no point is there a shack used as a bad guy hideout with a trapdoor in the center of the room. Go back to the Lone Ranger TV show, and every other episode has the exact same shack that the bad guys are using. They're always different bad guys. They're different places, but they have the same shack, and they have a trapdoor that they hide stuff in that's in the exact same place in the room. And I was very disappointed that that shack did not show up in this movie. Once again, looking back at the comments to see what folks are saying. Give me 1 second, guys. A lot of people just kind of talking amongst each other at the moment. Madman, the Lone Ranger kind of does to Cavendish what Batman does to Ra's al Ghul in Begins, sabotages a train, leaves him to die on it. Yes, you may have come in later after I had already mentioned that, because I've been going for almost 2 hours. Okay. I'm on the fence, because I feel like I have really kind of gone to town on this movie and been pretty thorough with it, but I do have my obligatory list of questions that I have started doing lately, and I think I'm going to read just a few of them. Are you ready? Might as well. We're already at 2 hours. Might as well take it home. We're going to take it all. We're going to take it on home, and then we'll get to tweet length reviews and my rating. I'm still on the fence. Let's see here. So just little things, a lot of this. Why would a man in a bank that's being held up by bank robbers think it's weird for one of them to wear a mask? Like, it's a bank robber. It's concealing identity. You would not be surprised by that. So what exactly is the framing device? Like, how exactly is Tonto explaining the story to the kid? The kid asks why the Lone Ranger should never take off his mask. The kid knows who the Lone Ranger and Tonto are. I guess it's just in the lore now. And it's weird that he wouldn't have thought of that, but okay. And then we flash back to a bank robbery. Why would Tonto start telling the kid about his exploits there? Like, it's just to subvert expectations for the audience, it feels like. But that's where things already feel off to me, where it's like, I'm not even buying the framing device. Like, why is he telling it that way? I already talked about that thing with Cavendish and the promising to kill, or Cole promising to kill him at the beginning. I'm getting delirious here. Let's see. Once again, who left a beautiful white horse out in the desert? If it's not a spirit horse, I guess it has to be, but then it's supposed to be ambiguous as to whether or not we have any supernatural stuff, so I don't know. Why does Cole want John at the beginning to help catch Cavendish? Why does Dan also deputize John? He's not trained, he doesn't like guns, he would be a liability. And he's the reason that Cavendish escaped, though they might not know that, but John himself, because of that, might think twice about going. It's weird that, again, that there are 7 Rangers instead of 6 when they die just because of source material. That doesn't make it bad or whatever, but it also makes him feel on a first viewing more like a fake Ranger. And, you know, then it makes the title weird, and it makes it hard to go with the premise in the story. And I've kind of gone over that. How much of what Tonto says is true? We've talked about that. Was the miraculous shot John makes at the arson fire an actual miracle or just luck? I have lots of those, and I won't go through all of them. Do horses actually eat scorpions? Like, does that happen because nature is out of balance? And then it is, I guess it's not really a question about how, like, supernatural things are happening, because there's never really been a time in history that I can think of where nature is all out of balance. You know, you'd think it would be happening now. It's like, oh man, we've got all these like climate change problems. Horses are eating scorpions. Why does the Indian chief bother explaining Tonto's backstory if he's just going to bury John and Tonto in the sand because he thinks Dan turned on them? I don't know, well, we talked about that. John leaving Tonto to die in the desert. Why does Tonto tell John he has nothing like me? Like me. He has nothing like me when he assumed John earlier would marry Rebecca. Like, I don't think he would say that. Oh, you have nothing. I mean, maybe he's thinking, like, well, John has already said that he's not going to marry Rebecca, so you really have nothing. But I'm still not sure he would say it that way. Why does Cole reveal his plan to John? I mentioned that. How unreliable a narrator is Tonto? Did everything actually happen the way he tells it to the boy? Are we seeing it the way he's telling it? Or does he tell it differently? I mean, we don't hear the actual words he says to the boy. The ending suggests it all happened, but it's ambiguous. We talked about that. But like how exactly did he explain it to the boy? I don't know what we're seeing versus what is being said, if that makes sense. And that's it. Let's go to tweet-length reviews. Here we go. So I'm going to get to my rating here in just a second. If you would like to, for later videos, and you can go ahead and put in your own rating and tweet-length review, or just rating, or whatever right now if you want to, and I will read super chats if you want to do that. So patreon.com/geekvolution. The $5 tier gets you access to that. $10 tier, again, is for Patreon producers, which allows you to help me choose things for Rewind on polls. Once we get past... by the way, this is request month, and oh my goodness, I didn't even mention who requested this. My apologies. Let me get that name out. This one was requested by... oh, Super Billy requested this, and he's been in the comments all night long, so thanks a bunch to you. Yes, this was a long time ago request. I'm finally trying to knock these out so that I can open the request tier for Rewind up again. And thanks to everybody for your patience, because some of these, it's been years, really, which is why I shut down that tier. And I, for lots and lots of reasons, could not get to the full written things, which is partly why I've started going to this podcast format, and I'm also really enjoying doing it this way and interacting with you guys while we go. Sorry they're so much longer, but, you know, if you got a lot of dishes to do, it's nice to have extra things to listen to. All right, going to tweet-length reviews now from Patreon. Jacob Schneider. Literally the only time I smiled during this whole ordeal was during the climax on the train. It was a chore to get through the rest of the film, though. Boring and uninspired. I give this one a 1 out of 4. A lot of these are the kind of review that I gave this in the first place before I was handcuffed to it. I got like Stockholm Syndrome now with this movie. Michael Austin Gulick, a bloated, overproduced, and largely soulless attempt at mass appeal. The wasted potential is especially highlighted if compared to Mask of Zorro. I intentionally didn't bring that movie up because I knew it was in this super chat, but I had that super chat in this tweet-length review, but I had that thought as well. Mask of Zorro, which took similar source material and made a blockbuster with substance that worked absolute magic in every way. This movie fails. 1 out of 4. Zorro feels more credible also because it didn't have to cheat and change so much about the mythology of the character, I don't think. Not that I know a ton about Zorro, but if you are a big Zorro fan because of Mask of Zorro, I would agree with that and say, yes, you could be a Zorro fan. Lone Ranger would be weirder to only see this movie and say I'm a Lone Ranger fan, I think. Jajira, a mediocre Western that has what Tarantino calls one of the greatest action sequences put to film, and I agree. I wish it was in a better movie. 2 out of 4. And Austin sent me a message today and said that apparently this might have just been Wikipedia or something. I don't have a source. I forget where he got this, but he sent me a screenshot that said that this was one of Tarantino's 10 favorite movies in 2013. Gooster123, one impressive action sequence does not a good movie make, but it's still a really fun action set piece. Man movie, great soundtrack, 1 out of 4. Hot Soup. I'm surprised by how many tweet-length reviews that we got for this, and I'm also surprised by how many people have been here this evening and are still here well into the night at 12 1 in the morning for a lot of you guys. Thanks so much. I just didn't know how much interest there would be in this particular movie. And thanks again for Super Billy for finally making me do it, because I probably would have avoided it even longer. A few good scenes speckled across an overly long, tonally inconsistent mess of a film. The one positive is the exceptional soundtrack. We're hearing a lot of the same things here, which I'd rather listen to imagining the film it might belong to than watching the one it actually does. 1 out of 4. Doped Dilly, an amazing score, stellar cast. Is that Super Billy just going by a different name on because some of these came from, I think that's who that is. Pardon me. Some of these came from Discord, which is one of the perks that you get. I think I mentioned that earlier. If you're at the $10 tier, amazing score, stellar cast, gorgeous cinematography, and a thrilling action climax can't salvage this bloated, ill-conceived, and bizarre tonal train wreck. A lot of the same words tonight that seems to harbor nothing but contempt for its title character. 2 out of 4. I felt that way before. I'm not feeling as hard on contempt for the character as I used to. And finally, Austin, the Day Ghost, having only seen this once, and while sick, yeah, I kinda love this. Y'all jokers must be crazy. 3 out of 4. I can't believe he quoted Suicide Squad. So our one 3 out of 4, that positive of a score. So now I'm going to get to my score, and we're going to rank this with the other movies that I have reviewed on Superhero Rewind. Let me pull up my Letterboxd. Okay, so I was between a 2 and a 2.5, and I almost bumped it to 2.5. And yesterday I was very much at a 1.5. It is story-wise, I've decided better than a 1.5, but with all of the criticism, I still felt the need to lob at it, and particularly just, again, I don't mean to keep harping on this, but just the sheer number of times our characters get out of a situation for no good reason. Like, even if it is just, like fate and he is a spirit walker and all that, I don't like that. I maybe went over a little bit on this having more of a mythic quality to it. That's a step too far. This is too much about actions and consequences to have big, elaborate action set pieces that feel like theme park rides in a movie that is trying too hard to be like a movie based on a theme park ride with Pirates of the Caribbean, to get away with that kind of thing. So I'm going to give it a 2 out of 4. I think it definitely fits right down the middle there. I don't think it's quite 2.5 material, especially, and everything is relative. You can't be consistent with this. I'm not at all, but especially looking at some of the other movies that I have at the 2.5, I don't think I can give it a 2.5. So this is a 2. I will put the stars in a little bit later. So I have this sitting at the bottom of 2 right now, trying to decide where I want to put it. It is, let's just see some of the movies that are here. It's better than RoboCop 2, I think. I like the story better than that. At least, on paper. And then, yeah, I'll put it above Masters of the Universe, sure. Is it better than Spider-Man 3? I mean, I don't think it's as mean-spirited in certain ways as that movie is. I know a lot of people like that way more than I do. Superman Returns, Amazing Spider-Man 2. Ooh, this is tough. I always say that, but it kind of is. And then, like, Swamp Thing, I can't put it above Captain Invincible. Which is probably not a 2. That probably should be a 2.5. I love that movie. I want to talk about that again pretty soon too, or at some point, because we got a. I'm jumping someplace else, but we finally got a deluxe triple disc set for that with a bunch of special features and multiple cuts and multiple commentaries and a music CD, and it's wonderful. But I digress with that. Anyway, I'm stalling because I don't know where I want to put this. And then, like, Sub-Zero and Superman Returns, I'm going to put it, boy, and then, like, Amazing Spider-Man 2, because it's got some of the same issues that does, too, right? Like, for right now, I'm going to put it right under Amazing Spider-Man 2, I guess. It's in the 97 spot. That's maybe too high. I can't think of a really good place to put this, to be to be honest. Austin says I should have given this a 2.5. Just for myself, I really feel comfortable with that. I think it's got to be at a 2. So that's where it's going for right now. And as always, that's subject to change. So, you guys are wonderful, and I really appreciate you being here. I want to say thanks, as always, to all of our patrons, but especially our Patreon producers, and I need to pull up all the names here because I did not remember to do that this time. But once again, I'll just say you can become a $5 patron and get the ability to put in tweet length reviews and have those read at the end of every episode. A $10 pledge makes you a Superhero Rewind producer, and you get a whole lot more to do besides just having your name read, but you also get your name read. And these guys are very involved with the show now, and they help keep me up on superhero movie news, and they give me a background on stuff that I maybe didn't know about before. I'm getting really educated by these guys, and it's just wonderful, and I'm really glad that I did it this way. And I want to thank those guys so much for participating and sticking around. So and then a $15 tier is for a request for our show, The Request. Eventually, I will bring back the higher tier for requested reviews for Superhero Rewind after I get through these, and I'm doing 4 of them if I can get away with it. At least 3. I'm going to try 4 this month. So I'm going to start at the top this time. Thanks very much to Blake, Chewbacca's Lover, David Crabtree, Elliot Slater, Goofster123, Hot Soup, Jojira, Joshua, Gilisano, Michael Martin, Stone Gasman, Super Billy, thanks again, buddy. The Day Ghost, Thomas Edgehill. Day Ghost, who's that guy? Adam March. Checkers the Inventor, Damon Begay, Jacob Schneider, Kareem Roberts, Michael Gulick, Miguel Rodriguez, Thorne Jones, Wendell Jones, no relation, Zach, Arnold Kim, Caleb. And that's everybody. So thanks again, guys. I appreciate everybody. Next time, I'm going to be doing something that I don't suspect a ton of people are going to be familiar with or know about. So I'm going to suggest that you find this movie within the next week and read it and watch it. So that we can all talk about it next Monday night. Would you? I'm going to do a requested rewind, so this won't be for Superhero Rewind, on a science fiction movie. I usually do science fiction rewind. Now I'm taking requests for other things now that aren't necessarily just science fiction, or I should say, I don't know how exactly I'm going to do it when I start taking requests again. I'm going to keep everything genre, probably, but a couple of things here that aren't. This is Man Who Fell to Earth, which I've heard wonderful things about. Was requested a long time ago by our longtime viewer and good friend of mine, Jeffrey Patron, fellow They Might Be Giants fan, and he put that request in a long time ago, and I never got to it, and I'm finally going to do that next week. The Man Who Fell to Earth is the name of the film. Check it out. I don't know how many people are going to be interested. I don't know what the view count is going to be like, but we're going to do it, and I'm going to do it as a rewind. I'm going to watch it twice, and I'm going to take notes, and then I'm going to dissect it, probably ad nauseum for you. Anyway, thanks again for listening to the podcast. Thanks for watching live if you did that. You guys are just the best, and I had a great time, and I hope you did as well. I will be back with you again next Monday night, and lots more stuff going on this week and all month for Request Month. Tomorrow night, pardon me, we used to do this on Tuesdays. I just changed it. Tomorrow is the Captain Logan Show. I'm doing that twice a week now, and then at 8 o'clock Central Time. And then Wednesday, we'll have a request for a Punisher arc, which is Widowmaker, Punisher Max Widowmaker. All that and more this week on Geekvolution. I was Captain Logan. Buy a t-shirt if you're so inclined. They're cheaper today than they will be in the next couple of days. And I'll see you again real soon. Bye, everybody.